Hi everyone, welcome to SJ's classes. This is my third video on the topic Indian aesthetics. In the first video, I introduced to you this field of study called Indian aesthetics. In the second video, I discussed the theory of Rasa based on the essay written by S.N. Dasgupta. In this video lesson, I will discuss the concept called Alamkara. And this will be based on the essay Use and Abuse of Alamkara written by V. Raghavan. Before we move into the details of this essay and this concept, let us have a brief introduction to the writer. Dr. Venkataraman Raghavan was born in 1908 at Tiruvarur, which is in Tanjore district, which is present-day Tanjavur in Tamil Nadu. He was a highly respected and prolific Sanskrit scholar and Indian musicologist. Musicologist is one who does scholarly and scientific study of music. Besides being a prolific writer, he also served in many scholarly committees and edited several journals such as the Journal of Oriental Research and the Journal of the Music Academy, Madras. In 1962, President Sri Rajendra Prasad gave him the Padma Bhushan Award in the field of literature and education. He was a veteran in the field of Alamkara, Natya Shastras, and Sanskrit aesthetics. The present extract or the essay that I am going to discuss as part of this video lesson has been adapted from two of his works titled Some Concepts of Alamkara Shastra and Bhoja's Sringara Pragasha. Bhoja's Sringara Pragasha is the biggest work in the field of literary criticism and the whole range of classical Sanskrit literature. Now let's go to the essay, The Use and Abuse of Alamkaras, written by V. Raghavan. V. Raghavan begins the essay, Use and Abuse of Alamkara, by defining what Alamkara is. He states that poetry is not mere thought. Thoughts and facts are by themselves unattractive and sometimes really unpleasant. Therefore, in poetry, it is necessary that feeling and imagination are used for the perception and presentation of matters of fact. So what V. Raghavan is trying to say is that facts are by themselves very unattractive and less appeasing, less appealing. So you have to incorporate your feeling and imagination to it so that it is made into something which appeals to our senses. He says that plain fact or feeling is always embellished in some manner and given a catching power. All poetic expression involves some kind of expressional deviation from the plain and the ordinary for the sake of greater effect. This expressional deviation or this striking disposition of words and ideas is Alamkara. Alamkara Shastra refers to that subject of poetics which focuses on study of Alamkaras. So to make poetic expressions appealing, pleasant, you have to incorporate some kind of embellishments. And this creates an expressional deviation. This expressional deviation is what is termed as Alamkara. Now let us look at the history of the word Alamkara. The word Alamkara is derived from the word Alam, which in Sanskrit means adornment. Bhamaha, who lived approximately between the last quarter of the 7th century and the middle of the 8th century AD, is supposed to be the first critic who dealt at length on the concept of Alamkaras. He described 36 Alamkaras in his work. His work is titled Kavyalamkara, but there are other works too with the same title. So critics often use the title Bhamahalamkara to refer to his work. Raghavan quotes Anandavardhana and his seminal text Dvanyaloka to point out that though Alamkaras constitute only the Sharira or the outer body, they can be made the Shariri or the soul. This is an argument made by Anandavardhana in his text Dvanyaloka. Even though they appear on the outside, on the Sharira, it can be incorporated into the poem or the work of art as the soul. It can be made part of the soul of the work of art. This happens when Alamkaras are not expressed but suggested. For example, the use of road as a metaphor in Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken. You have read the poem, or you might have heard about the poem. You know how Frost narrates his journey through the path that was less traveled, how he uses the road as a metaphor for human choices. So when something is suggested, that particular idea takes its position in the soul of that particular work of art. So when something is suggested, it becomes or it incorporates itself into the soul of that particular work of art. So Alamkaras, even though they appear on the outer body, they can be made into or they can be incorporated into the soul of the poem. We also come across Bhoja's classification of Alamkaras in this essay. Bhoja, who probably lived between 9th and 10th centuries, classified Alamkaras into those of Shabda or Bahya, Artha or Abhyantara, and finally a combination of Shabda and Artha, which is Bahyabhyantara. So this is Bhoja's classification of Alamkaras. Shabdalamkara, Arthalamkara, and finally Bahyabhyantara Alamkara. Shabdalamkara refers to words which enhance poetic beauty. For example, alliteration. Words that can be said as or words that come under the poetic device alliteration. And Arthalamkara refers to meaning which enhance poetic beauty. For example, a metaphor, as I quoted earlier. Finally, there are some Alamkaras that contribute both towards the external and internal beautification of a poem. For example, a simile. In the second part of the essay, we come across the concept called Aojithya. Raghavan states that there is such a thing as Aojithya, appropriateness, harmony, and proportion, which is the ultimate beauty in poetry. He points out Kshemendra, a writer on poetics who lived during the latter half of the 11th century, as the systematizer of Aojithya. Kshemendra believed that Aojithya is the life of poetry which has rasa as its soul. Aojithya, according to Raghavan, is the clear statement of the proper place and function of Alamkaras. Alamkaras have their meaning only if they are rightly placed in a poem. Now you have the term decorum introduced by Horace. You have learned it as part of the classical criticism. A decorum corresponds to what ought to be done and what ought not to be done when you are writing poetry. Aojithya can be equated with Horace's concept of decorum. Let's continue reading the essay. Raghavan then goes on to describe the various rules put forth by aestheticians with respect to the employment of Alamkaras. It was Anandavardhana who formulated the rules for the proper employment of Alamkaras. He was of the opinion that Alamkara is a subordinate to rasa and it must be employed in such a manner that should aid to the realization of rasa. He gives us the following instructions with regard to the employment of Alamkara. Alamkara shall be intended to suggest rasa. It shall be born along with the poet's representation of rasa. It shall be naturally and easily introduced. The poet shall not take a fresh and extra effort to effect it. So after reading all these instructions, what we understand is that Alamkaras must be naturally used, it must be something which is original, and it must aid in the evocation or realization of rasa. The poet should not take an extra or additional effort to effect it. Those who do not naturally get these Alamkaras in an appropriate manner can employ them effectively if they do so with discrimination or samiksha. Samiksha, according to Anandavardhana, converges at the following principles or points to be kept in mind while employing figures of speech or Alamkaras. They are: Alamkaras must be ancillary, which means it must be an added support or angabhuda. They must never become the pradhana or main component. So the main component must be rasa, and Alamkaras must help in the evocation or realization of rasa. It must be ancillary or added support. The figures of speech must always be added by keeping the main theme in view. They must not be over elaborated or overworked. Even if they are worked out, the poet must take care to give them the position of angabhuda only, which means as an added support or ancillary. V. Raghavan concludes this essay by stating that the function of Alamkara is to heighten the effect of the work of art and also aid the poet to say something more pointedly. As such, these Alamkaras should flow out of the rasa. Even as the rasa or emotion is depicted, these must come off without the poet consciously striving after them. So that is where V. Raghavan ends this essay. So as part of this video lesson, I gave you a very brief introduction to the writer V. Raghavan. Then I discussed what Alamkara is, and I also spoke about the history of or the evolution of this particular school of thought. I pointed out some of the aestheticians who have worked in this field like Anandavardhana and Bhoja. Bhoja's classification of Alamkaras. And I also spoke about Aojithya, which forms the core concept in the second part of this essay. Thank you so much for watching this video lesson.